This episode includes sensitive discussion about pregnancy and miscarriage. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Relationscapes. We're mapping the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other so we can build a more just world. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and our guide in this episode is New York Times critic at large Amanda Hess.
At first, when I did have a normal pregnancy, it seemed like these apps and influencers knew so much about me, that we shared so much, and they had this intimate insight into what was going on with me. And then the minute my pregnancy was revealed as abnormal, in fact, it was as if they had nothing to sell me anymore.
When Amanda Hess got pregnant, the internet seemed to know before anyone else, and she kind of loved that. Suddenly her feeds were filled with baby gear, momfluencers, and parenting advice curated just for her. But when her pregnancy took a complicated turn, a darker side of the digital world began to emerge. Her new book explores what happens when our most intimate experiences collide with the cold logic of algorithms, steering us toward conspiracies and unsettling ideologies from eugenics to hyper-individualism and beyond. The book is called Second Life: Having a Child in the Digital Age. It's funny and heartbreaking and bizarre, and Amanda Hess joins us to talk about it right now. Amanda Hess, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you so much for having me.
When you were 7 months pregnant, you were 2 months away from your expected delivery of your first baby, and your ultrasound went way longer than ultrasounds are supposed to go. And so you started to get a feeling that something might be up. And the technician, like technicians always do, is very vague about what's happening. They're waiting for the doctor to come in, and worry starts to take over. And in this moment, you write, I missed my phone. Like you're thinking about your phone across the room, like this could be a portal to some kind of assistance for you. I thought it would be great to actually have you read right from the introduction here to take us right inside the room with you. This is on page 8.
Sure. Okay, here we go. My phone sat on an empty chair 6 feet away. Smothered beneath my smug maternity dress, it blinked silently with text messages from Mark. If I had the phone, I could hold it close to the exam table and Google my way out. I could pour my fears into its portal and process them into answers. I could consult the pregnant women who came before me, dust off their old message board posts, and read of long-ago ultrasounds that found weird ears and stuck-out tongues. They had dropped their babies' fates into the internet like coins into a fountain, and I would scrounge through them all, looking for the lucky penny. For the woman who returned to say, it turned out to be nothing. Trick of the light. It was ludicrous, but in my panic, it felt incontrovertible. If I searched it smart and fast enough, the internet would save us. I had constructed my life through its screens, mapped the world along its circuits. Now I would make a second life there too. As I write this, 4 years later, I see my hour on the table as the moment that my relationship with technology turned, its shadow shifting around me. I reached for a sense of control and gripped tightly to my phone. It would not give me the answers I was looking for, but it would feed me wrong answers from its endless supply. It would serve me facts and conspiracies, gadgets and idols, judgments and tips. The baby tapped at my stomach. I rubbed my hand against it, returning the signal. The technician handed me a spray of paper towels and left me alone in the room. I heaved myself up and faced the exit. My stomach hung over the table's edge, waiting for the door to open.
This is such a great window into what we're going to see in this book, is your relationship to becoming a parent, what pregnancy was like, what having a kid is like, and then how reliant I think a lot of people have become, myself included, on the internet when we have questions. Like you knew that you could go there, and you say specifically it could feed you facts, conspiracies, gadgets, idols, judgments, and tips. to me, that's sort of an overview of the whole book. Like as we'll talk about in the interview, you're looking for facts on the internet, but there's also plenty of conspiracies. There's gadgets, there's stuff for sale. There's idols, influencers, and other people that we kind of look to as exemplars or to learn from. Plenty of judgments if you're in internet forums where people are going to call into question whatever you do, regardless of what you do. And also just little tips where you might see an Instagram reel to help you stop a tantrum or do anything like this. So are you thinking about that in that ultrasound room? Like, how much of this is really like an impulse you had in that moment where you're really thinking about, gosh, I can't wait to I got to figure this out.
The part where I wished I had my phone was like a constant loop in my mind as I was in there. The parts where I was like, it's only going to give me wrong answers. Like that came later after, a few years later. But I think, even now, like I turn to my phone when I'm ashamed, when I'm confused, when there's something that I don't even want to say out loud because it becomes too real. And so it's this place where I can act out things in my mind, and it becomes like a step in my obsessive loop.
Do you feel addicted to your phone?
I used to smoke cigarettes, and I was addicted to cigarettes. Like if I didn't smoke a cigarette, I would feel really physically bad.
Yeah.
I would be spinning out. Whereas like now, like if I don't use my phone for a while, I feel good. But in this case, it was as if like I needed the cigarette of my phone. And so I don't know if I don't usually like think of it as an addiction.
Yeah.
It's something that like I wish played a smaller role in my life.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually pointed that out, because maybe we overuse the addiction metaphor for that, and maybe phone use can be compulsive or unhealthy, but there are real addictions, and I think that's good to kind of point out that happens on a different level. I want to get back to the ultrasound, but first, I'd like to say if anybody had followed your journalistic career up to this point, they might be surprised to find that you're having a child at all, let alone publishing a book on having children, right? Because Mark, your partner, found this blast from your past at one point. He's like, hey, look at this old article I found where you say proudly opting out of having kids.
I had totally blocked this out, but at some point, Mark, my husband, sent me this story where that I'd written like a couple of months before I met him. And it was all about how, for me, and I was just wildly speculating about a larger sort of group, a trend among my generation, I was deciding not to have kids. And I was doing it, to be able to focus on my career and to be able to, I think I put it, like have some luxuries.
Mm-hmm.
And then, a few years later, I was starting to try to get pregnant. And I think, there's so many people who say they don't want to have kids and then they don't.
Yeah.
Like that is for sure something that happens quite frequently. For me, I can see like reading back through that story that there were things that I wasn't saying. And the thing that I would say to people if I were talking to them privately is I might want to have kids someday, but I would really have to find just like the perfect like situation where I had a partner who was really going to be like an equal partner. And as I was saying this, I was living in LA and like casually dating people, and I was like, that person literally does not exist and I will never find them. So like, I'm not going to have kids.
Yeah.
And so, I'm going to like sort of turn it into something that's good for me in my career. And then I met Mark, and like, he actually truly is that person where it's almost like my husband does so much, especially as I was writing this book. He's actually out of town right now, and so I have to do everything. And I'm like, oh my God. Like there's, there's stuff that you just don't even notice that your partner does. And
he comes off better than any partner of any of the books. I've read a lot of these books, right, for this show. He comes off better than pretty much any of the partners of these authors that I'm reading.
I mean, part of it is like he's
not
also
saying he's
like
perfect.
Yeah, I describe him at some point in the book as a non-player character, and I did that before like right-wing people started using that a lot. I was just using it like it's from its like sort of video game origins, but he's not a huge character in the book. But I do think like one of the greatest gifts that he's given me is that like beyond just doing all of this work for us and for our kids, I don't have to think about that particular line of inquiry. Like, what would
Hmm.
my life be like if my husband like did stuff, which is so just like such a phenomenon, I think, for so many women who are partnered with men. And so, like, creatively, I just don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you say he's not a huge character because the absence of the complaints or the absence of those burdens that would be put on you, to me, made him stand out in that sense. I think because I've read a lot of these books, right? So you're not talking a lot about having to do everything, having to be the manager of the home completely and being the only one that's dealing directly with the childcare and all of this. So I think
Hmm.
his absence spoke so loudly to me, and he pops up here and there because you were able to focus on some of these other issues. And other episodes will kind of talk about the mental load and all the kind of things that women are more likely to be carrying. But it was refreshing to have a book where I could set that to the side for a minute and focus on some of these other things that you bring up.
I mean, it becomes something that I grapple with in the book because eventually, when my son is born, he's diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder, and then I talk about this sort of kind of mother that I'm slotted into when that happens, which is the medical mom.
Yep.
And the medical mom is like assumed to be the one who knows all of the doctors' names
Hmm.
and is doing all of the research about the condition and is bringing the kid to the appointments.
And perhaps like
And
posting it on social media too, maybe going as
mhm,
far as to
mhm.
advocate for the child more.
Right, right, right. And it really be like it can become her entire identity. And Mark is just way better at organizational stuff, and so he really like takes a lot of the mental load off of
Yeah.
us.
Oh, it was nice to read. Good for you, Mark. But let's go back to the book here, where you talk about an app called Flow. So this is an app that you originally had downloaded to track your period, and you say the app didn't necessarily make you want to have kids, but it definitely sharpened your imagination about how that could go down. So now that you're with a partner and you have Mark, maybe you're more open to the idea of you can see becoming a parent. And then what's Flo doing to get involved in the mix here? Flo is a character herself.
Yeah. So I started using Flow just to track my periods, just to like know when they were coming because I would get very angry and sad like a day before it
Yeah.
happened. So weird. And
I
I
love when
found
you
that
say like you have it like every month, but every month it shocks you. Like, what is happening?
yeah, no, exactly. It felt that way. So just being able to anticipate that and being like, I'm probably especially angry because my hormones are a little weird right now, was very helpful. But it was really something that I needed to use once a month. I would just put in when my period was coming, and then it could tell me
Yeah.
when it was going to come again. But as I used it, it started to like make me aware. It always wants you to be more engaged in the app. Like no app
Hmm.
wants you to use it once a month. Like that's not
Yeah.
a great business
Business
proposition.
model. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just tells you all of this information about like your luteal phase and stuff and like what the
Yeah.
different hormone mix like is supposed to like make certain parts of your life easier or harder. And it also lets you know like when you're at your most fertile
Hmm.
and when you're at your least fertile during this cycle. And so it just made me before I had started using it, like I had literally I couldn't tell you when, in a cycle you were supposed to try to have sex to try to get
Yeah.
pregnant. I had no idea. And so it was the first sort of time that I really started to think about that. And then once that happened, it's not like, should we have kids one day? It's like, what if we had sex right now? You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
we produced a child immediately. So it did just really sharpen my imagination in a certain direction.
Yeah. The book points out how tech and apps and stuff are leading to this quantified self movement that we can hack. It's like biohacking, optimizing our health with science and tech. And I don't know, does it make sex feel more transactional if you're trying to have a kid? I mean, I kind of experienced that when we were trying to have our kids, but we were using like ovulation tests and
Hmm.
other stuff. We weren't using any apps. This is a little bit more than a decade ago. So did it make the process feel more mechanical to you?
Yeah. I mean, there's like one thing, this is not like the only way to create a child, but there's like one thing that has to happen
Yeah.
for it to be effective as a technique. So you're really focused on that occurring. But more than that, I think it was just something that was always in my pocket now. So
Yeah.
at any time of the month, I was just like sort of becoming aware of it. And it had this calendar that you could like sort of swipe forward to,
Hmm.
and I was starting to near my 35th birthday, which is when doctors start to code your pregnancy as geriatric for reasons that I don't entirely understand, like exactly why that's the cutoff date. But it is like
Perfect word for that.
yeah, it's a number that started to like loom for me.
Yeah.
And I just became aware of time as,
The biological clock.
yes, not in terms of like I have a story that's due in a couple of weeks, but like
Yeah.
I had this egg's coming then, which I never thought about my body that way before.
And that falls more on the shoulders of women. I have other episodes where we'll talk about how men should be considering this as well, that sperm health changes over people's lives, and the older a man is, that's a consideration. Anyway, it's just interesting that you had an app for it. Mark probably didn't have an app about like how his sperm health was, right? Like you're the one dealing
right.
with.
Although I'm sure they're working on it.
Okay, good.
It's like they're going to cover everything at a certain point.
Yeah. You mentioned how it was sort of on all the time, that, we used to have books like What to Expect When You're Expecting. You could have that book and then set it down, but you have something bigger than that book in your pocket all the time. And you say one of the sickest things is you just ignored all of Flo's advice as well. So after you got pregnant and Flo told you, okay, and made like a little fetus baby kind of on your phone that you could watch, then you're like not doing its advice either.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to make clear that like that's not what I was in it for.
Yeah.
And I didn't need Flo to tell me how to do certain things. Like Flo definitely had more specific advice for the types of food that it wanted me to eat based on like the week and the trimester, and I completely ignored that because I was just like, I could handle just trying to eat more leafy greens throughout, but I'm not gonna like
Sure.
modulate things like by the week.
I thought it was like spinach in first trimester, arugula in the second trimester.
Something, yeah, I have no idea. But it was more like, because like I can sort of be like, well, that doesn't sound like a big deal. It was as if like I was checking it to make sure that like I was like on the level pretty much. You know what I mean? That I was like assuring myself that there wasn't something super important that I was forgetting to do.
Okay, so Flo's with you all along, and you talk about how Flo knew before pretty much anybody else did. And the internet sort of knew that you were pregnant before anybody else did. You told your partner, Mark, but people usually wait a while to tell others that they're pregnant in case of pregnancy loss. But you say it only took 48 hours for the brands to find you. So let's talk about targeted ads and how you started experiencing those really early on.
Some of the earliest screenshots that I took for this book, I started to like do a lot of sort of memory preservation and note taking through like taking screenshots and then starting to annotate them. And some of my earliest screenshots are of these like first ads that I got after I logged my pregnancy into Flo, and I started to like search the internet for the most obvious, like I'm pregnant, what do I do? Search terms.
Yeah.
And it really started right away, and it was like, you shouldn't be using those drugstore prenatal vitamins. Here's a much more expensive one that you should order online. And just these incredibly idealized images of pregnant women and mothers just immediately started flooding my phone. There was so much about this process that surprised me, but one of the things that surprised me the most was that these ads really affected me on an emotional level, where like I know what advertising is, like I know what it's trying to do. And for whatever reason, I think because I was so unprepared to be pregnant and I wanted to do everything right, but I had no idea what that means. Like pregnancy felt so much like a thing that was happening to me as opposed to like an active thing to do. I think just being inundated with these images that really have nothing to do with anything other than like these sort of women being like thin and beautiful.
And mostly white, you point out too.
Yeah, I really internalized that, I think. And even if I didn't want to or feel like I could look exactly like them. There was a drum beat to all of this information that was like, you need to think about being pregnant all the time. You should like present as like a healthy pregnant woman or whatever. And it started to just feel like my body was a public concern. Like my
Yeah, you
pregnancy
said
was
people
something
start
that was being
commenting on it
seen.
too in public.
Yeah, right. Yes. Once like my bump, I hate that word. What else do you call it? Yeah.
My lovely lady lump.
Once my stomach was larger, people started to comment on it. And again, I was surprised that I got a lot of affirmation from that, where I was like, yeah, you're right. I am pregnant.
Yeah,
I'm doing it.
People would call you mama and stuff. You're like, I don't know you, but
Yeah. This was also like during, like the beginning, the early days of COVID. And so I was like, a person's talking to me. That feels good.
Yeah.
But
you also talk about feeling a little bit like an imposter in the sense of you didn't get this huge rush of a feeling of like, I'm being a mother now. This is motherly. Like, it sounded like the pregnancy felt a little alien to you, that it wasn't comfortable, that it didn't feel the kind of natural thing that people might expect. And they think this is just the natural thing that women do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely felt like the weirdest thing I had ever done. I mean, there's a person inside of your body. Like that's, I don't know. Obviously, it's been happening for many years now to a lot of people, and it's how most, all people are generated. But even now, I'm like, that's crazy. Like that happened.
It was refreshing to read this because my wife felt very similar to kind of how you did. And a lot of the pregnancy books I read tend to more often go into the just celebration of it and the empowerment and the feeling of creation. I don't see as much of this, like, this feels confusing and weird and alien to me.
Yeah. And I think that was part of my fascination with just like the pregnant internet, where I was like, who are these women who feel just like so at ease being pregnant, and why? And what does that mean? And why don't I feel that way? Yeah, it was like I hated being pregnant. Like, I think I love my kids so much, and like the number one thing that is stopping me from having more kids is like I refuse to be pregnant again. Like I won't do it.
Well, you incurred some trauma too. I want to talk about that back in the ultrasound room again. The doctor finally came in and told you that he saw something he didn't like. He suspected Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. Is that how you pronounce Wiedemann?
Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome.
Wiedemann. Okay, thank you. And you asked him to write it down. You were in there alone because, again, this was sort of during COVID, so Mark couldn't be there with you. You're in the room with the doctor, and you're starting to go into a daze, and you just say, can you write that down? And he says, don't Google it, which, of course, is basically the first thing you did after you told Mark.
Yeah, I mean, of course I was going to do that. But I understand now why he said that. And it's because, like, when you Google something like that, the images that you get back are at times alarming. And the information that you get is not necessarily up to date, especially for a condition that is rare like that one. I think it's something like between 1 in 12,000 or 1 in 20,000 births are of a child who has Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. The medical consensus on it is changing all of the time. So when you Google it, you might find, I was like immediately going to medical journals to try to read about what this was and what the range of outcomes were. And something that was published 10 years ago is, really different from something that is published today.
Yeah, and the way they detected it with your son, wasn't it because the tongue looked large? And so it was like, okay, an enlargement of different organs like the tongue is a symptom of this.
Yeah. It's an overgrowth disorder that causes, the overgrowth of certain parts of the body. And most kids with Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome have macroglossia, which is a large tongue. Some kids don't. They'll have like enlargements in different parts, but it's a pretty significant tell for an ultrasound doctor.
You found a phrase in one of these medical journals, a diagnostic odyssey, this sort of quest to figure out what is wrong and what might have caused it and all the different tests to diagnose it. And you're trying to figure out your share of maybe blaming it. There's a quote here where you say, at one point you say, I thrashed and sobbed in bed one afternoon, acting like a dying animal. I should have become a better person, before making a copy of me. What's it like writing about that? I mean, you laugh a little bit now. And in that moment, are you thinking, I might have to write about this? Maybe I shouldn't thrash as heavily here.
I think when I first got pregnant and I was seeing how like my Flow app was converting from this girl power period app to an app that seemed much more punishing, that was like, you now need to make an optimal human, I was
Yeah.
immediately like, I should probably write about this. And so I was starting to take notes and take screenshots. And then when I had an abnormal ultrasound, one of my first thoughts was, you brought this. It was this mystical feeling that like I brought this upon myself by believing that it was this light topic that I could write about and turn into something that was amusing. And I felt very superstitious that I had done something. And I mean, once you have an abnormal ultrasound, the doctors are trying to figure out what it is and what it means. And so there's a whole investigation, in fact, into what you have done. You know, they're asking you like if you took hot baths, if you took certain medications, and
part of
like,
it's not to blame you either, right? It's to say, if there's medications or something, maybe we could track this and prevent other, whatever. So, but it probably didn't feel like that to you. It felt like, what did you do?
Right. I know. And it felt like really like, it felt beyond like what little action did I take that was wrong during my pregnancy, and more like, what kind of person are you who would bring a child into the world and not just be the most possibly prepared to do it right? And so at that moment, I was like, I've somehow cursed myself by just believing that I just had a normal pregnancy that I could just write about like this.
Were you already kind of a superstitious person, or was that unusual for you to think like, oh gosh, I did something, or maybe even thinking about doing a story about it?
Yeah, it was incredibly bizarre for me. I think before this happened, I didn't even really understand on an emotional level, like why anyone would like believe in ghosts or something. And now I understand more. I think I'm just more in touch with like the non-rational influences on me. But once I had that feeling, then for a while I was like, obviously you're not going to write about this. And then I was like, later, I think after my child was born, I started to think that feeling that you had, that intense feeling of shame and self-blame, and this feeling like an abnormal ultrasound was the worst thing that could happen to you, these are very like destructive ideas. And you should probably understand better like why you were thinking those things and feeling them.
That's Amanda Hess. We're talking about her book, Second Life, Having a Child in the Digital Age. And Amanda's also a critic at large for the New York Times right now, writing about internet and pop culture for the arts section, and also contributes regularly to the New York Times Magazine. So we hinted at this earlier, Amanda, but the internet introduced you to legions of women who believed that pregnancy and childbirth had become too medicalized, and they're taking pregnancy back. You could almost say they're making pregnancy great again, to use a triggering phrase. So this is the free birth or the natural birth movement. Not that a bunch of them are MAGA. I don't mean to suggest that. But I think the attitude is similar in envisioning an idealized way to be that needs to be reclaimed. And you said, you're not, in the book, you said you're not religious or spiritual. You're a newspaper writer. You like science. You like precision. You're reading medical journals. But it seemed like these influencers sounded a siren call to you at first. It seemed to me that you were drawn toward them not just for journalistic interest, but you were sort of, I don't know, maybe feeling something as you started to get introduced to some of these. The algorithm starts serving them up to you.
Yeah. So after my initial abnormal ultrasound, I had a much more abnormal ultrasound where a doctor told me that she suspected that the baby's brain was like severely underdeveloped. And so I ended up getting a fetal MRI where I'm laying there and they're doing various tricks to try to get the baby to be still in my stomach, to basically fall asleep so they can get a look at a fetus's brain. And then after that MRI, the MRI doctor told me that the brain was completely normal. And I think after that experience, I realized that doctors aren't psychic. And they're very limited in what they can know, especially when their patient is inside of somebody else's body. So, my faith in it was shaken, I think. And I started to become interested in these people who, they call it free birth, resolve to give birth with no medical interventions at all. No, they'll give birth at home, but with no midwife, not even a doula usually, because they often consider a doula to be a part of like an arm of the medical system, which they want to banish from their birth experience. Often these women will reach a point where they have such an alarming complication that they will call an ambulance and end up in the hospital. There's like a pretty serious percentage of them that do end up seeking medical care. But it's as if the achievement is to do it completely alone. And there was so much about sort of my own repressed feelings and suspicions about myself that I saw reflected very openly in them. Just like, why did I feel like birth was an achievement, and specifically like a feminine achievement, something that I had never directly aspired to really before. It was, that idea was swimming around in me. And then also,
you thought of having kids, but not giving birth, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Or that the way that I gave birth would be somehow meaningful. Whether I used pain relief or not, whether it was at home or in a hospital or in a birthing center or whatever.
Some of them are promising really pain-free experiences too. They say they get in these like sort of these meditative trances where, you don't even really feel it. This is amazing.
Yeah, they call that supernatural pain-free childbirth. And there's a lot of overlap with religious communities and this community. So there's this idea that like basically like your faith in God will take your pain away. But there's also this just like this extreme feminine performance style that it engenders, which is like, it's not just you can withstand a huge amount of pain in order to bring a child into the world, which is your ultimate use as a human woman. But you're so sort of purified and at one with this process that you don't even feel pain at all. And for me, like sometimes I'll still come across these like images of women who claim to have pain-free births, and there'll be pictures of them and where I'm like, that this woman looks miserable. Like it looks it looks like she's in pain, but there's
maybe she successfully dissociated during that experience.
I know. I mean, really, it is like a goal is to deny that your body has any needs at all, as you're producing this other body.
We could do Severance. Are you watching Severance? They have the birthing cabin. So
you
can go there and like just have a person that's giving birth. That's their whole existence.
Have my like primal innie who only exists to birth. Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch. That made a lot of sense to me.
The question I have, though, is as you're getting into this, were you drawn in? Did you have a moment where you're like, oh, I really kind of want this to be true, and then kind of fell away from that? Or were you holding it skeptically the whole time as just a curiosity to you? Like, what was happening there?
So I started listening to free birth podcasts where women would tell like these long stories and accounts of their free births and all of the aesthetic details of them.
This episode's sponsored by the Free Birth Society podcast. No, just kidding.
Yeah, sorry. I started to feel like, so I wasn't listening to them as a fan, but I also wasn't hate listening either. I think that it was filling this bizarre psychological need that I had created through going down like so deeply into a highly medicalized pregnancy where I was resolved to have this like intensely monitored experience after I had these abnormal ultrasounds where my baby would be born and go straight to the NICU. And so my pregnancy and the beginning of his life would be really run by doctors. And I think I had some reservations about that because I had just had this experience where a doctor told me that my baby's brain was underdeveloped, and then they were like, "Oh, never mind, it's
Just
completely
kidding.
fine."
Yeah.
And I was spinning out. I was like anxious about that for obvious reasons. So I found that listening to these people who are giving birth with no assistance at all really like contained all of my anxieties about the medical system and allowed me to be more confident in my own choices, where I'm like, well, I'm obviously not going to do that. You know, it makes sense for me to give birth in a hospital, in fact.
Yeah, you talk about how natural birth is a storytelling project, but pregnancies like yours didn't really fit the narrative because of possible complications, and that some of these episodes directly talk about that, where some free birth people would say, yeah, you could give birth to a baby that will die right then, but they'll just say that's part of life, and they'll sort of just release it into the universe.
Yeah, there are a couple of episodes that speak with women who had stillbirths or who had sort of like late miscarriages. And often they talk about this idea that like it's a kind of natural outcome for certain children to die. And I, listening to that was clarifying for me because I was like, I absolutely do not believe that way. I 100% want a live child.
Yeah.
And
see, I'd kind of meet him halfway. What about this though? Think about like some babies are going to die, and this is really hard. And so I want to say there could be something good in like accepting that part of life, not to avoid grief, not to spiritually or emotionally bypass it. But at the same time, if we have all these resources that could help and could help a baby live, that's worth trying for.
I think, for me, ultimately, like underneath a lot of this is a strain of eugenic thinking that believes that, not that like, it's like having children for me was very much coming into contact with mortality, where suddenly I was like, well, I can't die because I have to take care of my kids and they need to have a mother,
Yeah.
And one day my kids will die. And I think about that all the time, hopefully not soon, hopefully after me, but like they will die. And so there is a part of me that is a little envious of someone who can accept such eventualities because I certainly have not come to terms with the fact that that's going to happen. But at the same time, there's also this belief that, people who are born with certain disabilities or medical conditions like really should not be alive.
Right.
And I've seen this, in a lot of other spaces too, including among scientists who are developing biotechnologies, where there's a certain kind of, techno-eugenicist who thinks that our medical system is so advanced now that it's not weeding out the right people.
Yeah. And it's weakening the overall human race or something.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about birth, there's like a history of eugenics in, I think, basically every birth technology. Yeah. So there's something incredibly offensive and chilling about that. And I was really, one of the things I was really interested in exploring in this book was when I was pregnant, I was so scared about having a child who had a disability or who had a rare genetic condition. Like the word syndrome was like the scariest word to me. And then once my child was born and I was the mother of someone who had a disability, my alliances were completely realigned. And the idea that there are people who are earnestly working on technologies to eliminate disability becomes really scary to me. Because we know, and now more than ever, there's just decreasing public investment in actually caring for people, whether they're disabled people, pregnant people, elderly people, whatever. And the fact that like our society might be more excited about like preventing these people from existing, as opposed to treating them, I think is really alarming.
Your chapter 9, it's called Growth, is so good on this issue. And you also talk about your ambivalence about abortion. You're pro-choice, but you also recognize that can be used to cull the herd, so to speak. Like you mentioned, like this is a way to weed out disability through prenatal testing. It's undergirded by eugenics and abortion. And we live in a society that doesn't have enough supports for people with disabilities or their families. And so there's also just a temptation to perhaps seek an abortion because there's not going to be enough support for some people. So with you're wrestling with this, and you had to confront your own ableism in ways that you hadn't previously anticipated. There's a saying that I've said before: I don't care who my baby is as long as they're healthy. That as long as they're healthy,
yeah,
that is such a loaded thing to say that you don't realize until you deal and experience people with disabilities.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I explore in the book is that's presented as a neutral thing. It's like, I don't care if it's a boy or a girl. I care if they're healthy. Or like 10 fingers, 10 toes is another one that I think is like, when you really think about it for like 2 seconds, it's pretty bizarre.
It's gross.
Yeah, it's like, like actually I will take my child with any number of fingers or toes. Like it's, that's not the most important thing about a person. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it really complicated some of my feelings about abortion, where I still feel like it should be available to everyone at any stage of pregnancy. And I actually feel more seriously, emotionally sure of that than I did before. A baby, like a fetus, at whatever stage, it's so entwined with your body, and I don't think that choice should be taken away from anyone. But it also, made me much more interested in the reproductive justice movement, which explores all of these things that we need to make people truly like have free choices when they're making that choice. And that includes like actual support for caregivers of disabled children, which we don't have, and we have less and less. Like the children's hospital that my son goes to just had millions of dollars of funding slashed by Elon Musk personally, it seems. So it's a real consideration that people have to make, which I think is a shame. But I think there was also something else going on in my mind, and it wasn't simply, can I handle this? Can I afford this? It was, I feel this sense of shame around having a child who's not normal. And I realize that when people say they want a healthy child, what they really mean is they want a normal child. And I never would have said that. I never would have articulated that. Like, I desire to produce a normal child. But it was it was embedded very deeply in me, that idea. I did want that.
Yeah.
And sort of exploring that feeling was one of the things I was most interested in doing in the book, where for like someone like me who is able-bodied at the moment, doesn't have a lot of, or hadn't had a lot of interaction with the disabled community. There are so many people like me whose first kind of like real life experience with disability is confronting this medical question during pregnancy. And when you're pregnant, like the idea of a disability or a medical condition is so ripped out of human context, because you don't know anything about your baby. I didn't even know, I never had a baby before, and I didn't know just how like instantly delighted I would be by them. All you know is that they have this, syndrome that causes a collection of physical changes and differences. And so I think in order for like people to really be able to make free choices, we need to be talking about that and having a real discussion about just like unacknowledged ableism and eugenic thinking, frankly, that I think exists in a lot of people.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book is when you're talking about when your son was watching Dumbo. In the book, you call your son Alma. That's a pseudonym that the internet had falsely assigned to him. So you carry that through the book. It's cool. But he's watching Dumbo, and it's hitting you now how much the story is about disability. Now that you have a son who with a very large tongue, and you're watching this. He's watching this movie about an elephant with these huge ears. And there's this scene you describe where there's these other mothers. Mrs. Jumbo's there with her baby, loves her baby so much. And the other moms are so cruel and saying all these terrible things. And you used to think maybe that's a bit ham-fisted, but you realize now that the commentary is kind of real. That stuff, people say stuff. And you've seen people saying things on the internet. You've heard comments about your own son. And you quickly looked up Dumbo, because that's kind of what you do. You searched Dumbo disability studies, and you found that, Dumbo's problematic. It tells a story that makes a person with a disability into kind of a superhero because of their disability, which redeems them. To me, it's sort of like the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer situation, where he's got this red nose, he's ostracized for it. But then if it benefits other people or entertains them or whatever, then it redeems the character, and that's problematic. And you grant that. But you also noticed some other things that was really moving to me. Maybe talk about what else Dumbo did for you, what you saw in that film.
When I started to look for disabled writers reflecting on Dumbo, I found an essay by this woman, Victoria Lucas, who has a condition called cherubism, and it produces an enlarged lower face. And she writes an essay about how when she first saw Dumbo when she was 9 years old, she later realized that, it was the first time she had seen some kind of representation of someone who had like a similar condition in a movie. And there was a way in which that was comforting for her. And Dumbo sort of became a kind of role model for her. And I realized as I was watching the movie that I was like paying very close attention to Dumbo's mother and what she does in the movie. And I think I was just so naturally drawn to try to watch this old, racist Disney movie to try to get some clues about how I should be negotiating my own role. And she does something at the beginning of the film where Dumbo is delivered to her by the stork. And she sees that he's this adorable elephant who has these very large ears. And she wraps him in his own ears as his kind of baby blanket. And it's just such a beautiful, image of Dumbo and his mother, just adapting to his body, and it's really beautiful. And then she does some things that are less beautiful, where she becomes so angry at these other elephants who are making fun of Dumbo that she physically assaults them, and she's put in a kind of zoo prison. Yeah. And Dumbo needs to, his whole journey to impress the circus is really so that he can free his mother. And so the movie, also got me started thinking about the ways in which my own reactions to my son's disability and to people's comments about it could also hurt my son. And my own feelings could become a burden that he might be expected to shoulder above everything else. And so that's a theme that I explore in that chapter.
Right. This is where you talk about the medical mom role. And also, we see you exploring Reddit as a place to kind of think through things. This is really interesting. I don't spend a ton of time on Reddit. I go there occasionally. But you talk about what I'll call lurker psychology. You nailed it in a way that I'd never thought about it. You were saying that you were seeking out simulations of all your unspoken conversations. That's a brilliant way of putting it.
I'm such a lurker. I think because I'm a professional writer and I have to write all the time for my job, I'm not a poster. I just don't spend a lot of time posting.
Well, don't write for free. Come on.
Especially during the first years of my kids' lives, I found myself doing this a lot, where I was just acting out dramas from my own life
Yeah.
within like these anonymous threads and sort of projecting the thoughts of Redditors onto my neighbors or people who I would, like strangers I would pass on the street, you know? And there is a way in which I think the internet is a place where, you know, the norms are different. And especially if you're anonymous, there are things that you may say there that you may not say anywhere else.
Right.
And so I took the leap of, you know, feeling whether it's maybe not on a rational level, but on an emotional level, that this was the internal monologue of everyone who I was interacting with. And these were the things that they didn't want to say out loud. And the internet is so fused to my own thinking. You know, I really, in the book, treat it as kind of like a stage for acting out like the dramas of my mind. And that's what I go to Reddit for.
Right. And I have to ask you if you think it's a net positive or net negative, and maybe it's not fair to do it so black and white, but I ask because, like you said, people can say whatever they want in many cases on the internet, or at least there's a lot fewer guardrails. And I feel like it can be easier then to spread prejudice because you can have it reinforced to you more than you could, like, maybe you wouldn't meet so many openly ableist or racist or sexist or misogynist people at your high school because maybe people aren't going to be as open about it at school or something, or in the workplace. But you can go on the internet and get red-pilled, quote unquote, and find out all kinds of crap and get sucked into terrible ways of thinking in ways that if we didn't have the internet. Then there's the flip side of that, of like marginalized communities have been able to find each other and find growth, and LGBTQ communities have been able to develop new discourse and language around their experiences. So I see positives and negatives, but I just wonder what your take is on that.
Yeah. I mean, you may have noticed that I don't I don't have many sort of like solutions in my book. And I really did try to, I never have a strong kind of like feeling or answer about those questions, like whether you should actually use a certain gadget or not. Because like technology is here, and to me, it's the water that we're swimming in. And I feel like the thing that interests me is trying to understand how it works as a like storytelling mechanism, but whether society would be better off if certain things did or didn't exist, like I have no idea. I don't know. I do think that like internet products, like any other company, should be owned by workers and not by billionaires. I don't know if that would necessarily make the product less evil. But it would solve one problem, which is that, you know, they create these like tech oligarchs who become our political overlords.
Yeah.
So I think we could focus on that first.
And I love your exploration in general of the marketing and of the capitalism of parenting. There's a chapter called Gear where all the equipment that is promising to make parents' lives easier. There's that robotic crib, the snoo, which is like, oh, it's going to perfectly rock your baby to sleep and it will detect if your baby starts to stir and all this. And you tried it out and you found it's sort of like the Jetsons, the old cartoon where like most of the stuff in the future kind of sucks. They have like some cool technology and stuff, but it only sort of half works, and it usually can cause as many problems as it could solve. So I liked seeing you say you and Mark were less susceptible to all the advertising for your second kid because you're like, okay, like fool me once, shame on you.
Right. Exactly. And also, like, I already had like too much stuff, so I was like, you know, I'm not going to be buying more. I think that's why it's so important for these companies to like capture you while you're pregnant, because when you're pregnant, like before you have any babies, like you have no idea, and babies like actually do need a few things that are completely bizarre and that like if you're not a parent you've like never encountered before, but you don't necessarily know what those things are, and which are just like completely superfluous.
One of my favorite things, superfluous. One of my favorite things were these like plastic toys, but they were like these hook things, and they would kind of form together in a chain, and we would use those to like hook their toys to the stroller or like do all this.
Yeah,
and I never would have bought that for myself, but someone bought those for us, and that was one of my favorite things we had.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, like occasionally they're very helpful. And that's really like, you know, it's the same thing with parenting advice Instagrams, where like once in a while they tell you to just word for word say this to your kid. and like it works one time. Like they're just not upset anymore. And then you'll just always go back, even if like 99% of the things that they say are completely useless.
Yeah. A couple months ago, I follow some neurodivergent ones, some parents of neurodivergent folks. And a lot of these are actual therapists as well. So they're trained as well. I tend to try to go more toward expertise than just your random person that's like, oh, here's what worked. But they talked about how for some neurodivergent kids, touch is a really helpful way to center them and get them to lock in. So I'm not trying to make my kid compliant and obedient in all situations, but if I need my kid to go to the bathroom in the morning and he just refuses to do it, they said, just go up and like hold their hand and just say, come with me. And so I made up this thing for my kid called like the pinky train. So I just go up to him with my pinky out and we hook pinkies and he'll follow me anywhere. It was the weirdest magic trick. It's magic. It works. It still works. I think it's only failed like once. So yeah. And I'm like, wow, I got this tip on the internet from Instagram and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But then a bunch of other tips like don't apply to my kid at all. So
Right. I mean, it's so amazing. My broad experience with the pregnancy internet and then like the baby internet was so much of it is set up for like a quote unquote normal person or a normal baby or normal pregnancy. And so at first, when I did have a normal pregnancy, it seemed like these apps and influencers like knew so much about me, that we shared so much, and they had this like intimate insight into what was going on with me. And then the minute, that my pregnancy was revealed as abnormal, in fact, it was as if they had nothing to sell me anymore. And I started to get these like advertisements for this website called Anatomy Warehouse, which sells like plastic body parts to medical students and to like to medical schools.
Wow.
And it was because, I had gone from Googling like morning sickness cure to, a very specific measure of a very specific body part of like a fetus. And it was like, okay, well, now you're in like bizarro medical world. You're like cast out from that. And that was true with books as well. Even books that are like produced today, pregnancy books, at the end, there'll be this like little squared off appendix that's like, if you have any abnormalities in your pregnancy, read this. But if you don't, do not read this because it's too frightening. It's too scary for you. So just like stay away from it. And then even then, it only really covers like a very limited sort of band of conditions.
Yeah, the internet sort of treats us like a weird aunt that we don't see very often, but she heard that she saw us reading a graphic novel once, a very specific one, and then she gets this idea in her head, oh, this kid likes books, and like buys you an encyclopedia or something not related.
Right.
like the weird aunt that kind of gets the gift wrong a little bit.
I know, which is why, it ends up becoming so humiliating when like it starts to feel like you need to see what it's offering you, which during my pregnancy, like it felt like I did.
That's Amanda Hess. We're talking about her new book, Second Life, Having a Child in the Digital Age. And you might have seen some of Amanda's work in other places like Slate Magazine. She was an editor at Good Magazine and columnist at the Washington City Paper. And she was also the second vice president for the News Guild of New York. Unions are great. 3 cheers for that. So, Amanda, I wanted to talk now about the judgment factor. So, the technology of texting is great for parents in many ways, but for you, it became the downstairs neighbors texting you constantly about the fact that you have a toddler who's making some noise. And this part maybe triggered me more than most of the book. I don't know why. I felt in my heart the disability stuff, but in terms of just getting really angry, I was so mad that your downstairs neighbor was texting you all the time and being like, it's too loud up there. And then you got into reading about all the anti-natalist movement stuff. Woof.
Yeah. I mean, I had these downstairs neighbors who were constantly texting me to complain about my kids being too loud. And to be clear, my kids are too loud. Like they are very loud. And like, it's something that I wish on a personal level I could manage more easily. But they, even now they're only 2 and 4. And so It's really a life project that we're working
this
on.
is prime time for the loudness.
Yeah, they're very loud. And so I'm sympathetic to that. But also, like, most of the time, there's nothing I can do about it. Like, I can't muzzle them. I can work with them on these, like, long-term, like, solutions to try not to, like, wake up and immediately start jumping around and screaming. But it's not something I can, when I get a text, I can be like, oh, sorry, like, putting the muzzle on the 18-month-old or whatever. So these texts really started to bother me, and they bothered me because they were annoying that someone expected me to resolve this situation that I couldn't resolve. But also they bothered me because I got this sense from them that it was my duty as a parent, if I wanted to be a good parent, to make my children compliant and to make other adults comfortable with my children existing in the world.
You owe it to the world because you're one of those breeders.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is this situation where, like, at that point, I didn't want to have a true relationship with my neighbors because I didn't want to get more enmeshed in this, and I didn't want to get more involved. And that's a really bad thing. Like, that's a really sad thing. And it ended up being the case where the only thing that I shared with these neighbors was my floor and their ceiling. And I think it's a really bad vision for society where that is, like, the only communal sort of, like, benefit or a non-benefit, as it may be, to living together. So, yeah, that was something I was grappling with sort of at the end of the book.
It's funny that your response to it was to dig into Reddit forums that hated kids. Like you say, Mark pointed out, he's like, I'm kind of drawn to content that kind of helps make me feel better, and you're like actively seeking out the stuff that really makes you feel worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think that also is, the whole reason I wrote this book is because I experienced a lot of things that were, like, I had a lot of thoughts and feelings that were, like, incredibly ableist, and they were very traditional and at times, like, incredibly conservative. And I wanted to understand why I had all of these responses that I felt like were just very negative and bad. And so the whole book is really like my sort of attempt to understand my unique form of internal villainy, I guess. I'm trying to, like, I was trying to really understand the parts of myself that I was most confused about and ashamed by. And that's often what I'm doing when I go on the internet too.
Well, I was so happy to go along with you for the ride. I learned so much from the book, and there's so much that we didn't have time to talk about. You talk about things like the rise of gentle parenting and discourse about the trauma that the previous generations of parents inflicted on us. You talk about the rise of the trad wife movement. There's explorations of medical racism. You talk about your C-section and how difficult that was, and the history of C-sections and medical procedures. So there's so much more in the book. It's called Second Life, Having a Child in the Digital Age. I can't recommend it enough, Amanda. Truly, this is such a good book. I loved every page, really.
Thank you so much.
All right, Amanda, we always like to close with a segment called Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. And we're recording this interview before your book comes out in May. And so you might not have very many regrets about it at this point. I don't know. But you might have some challenges that you experienced while you were putting the book together, or some surprises that happened because of doing the book. And so it's kind of a choose your own adventure question where you get to tell us something about what it's like getting this book out there.
I mean, I have a lot of regrets. I could just do all regrets.
Oh, good. I should have known based on the book itself.
I regret not writing a book before I had children. I had so much time, and I didn't know. I didn't know how much time I had. And there's definitely a part of me that, like, after I had kids, I became this obsessive freak about working on the book. And I was stuck in my house a lot, because I really didn't realize this, but once you have kids, you have to stay there. Even when they're sleeping, you got to be there all the time. So I did have that time where I was stuck there, but I just had so much more time before I had kids.
See, but even when you are home in there, the mental furniture seems very occupied anyway. So you might think, I'm going to put my kid down for a nap and go get some other stuff done. But I don't know. You're so burnt out or just stretched thin because of other stuff that even that free time you have is a little bit sparse.
I know. I often have to clean up my surroundings and fold my laundry before I can focus on work, which is bad because that's never done. I have more regrets.
Yeah, let's hear them.
I would have cut more of the book. I cut some,
Really?
like at the very end, as I was just like really sending it to copy edit. I made some like crucial chops, but I think, I was really concerned about like covering every angle. And of course, like you
Yeah.
can't, like I have so many thoughts and feelings about everything in my book that have just like continued to complicate themselves and that I could never put in there. But you also have to just think about the book as a book and a reading experience. And I think I should have been more brutal about that. I have one more regret.
No, but before you get to that, I do want to say too, there's a great critique of individualistic ideas of parenting and communal ideas of parenting at the end where you talk about, you kind of went to this rebirth or this sort of like gentle parenting, this retreat for like woman land or something where it's just all the moms go out there. And you noticed how this supposedly hippie communal place was all about individualistic, individualized, isolated parenting philosophy, which should run counter to the kind of community ethos you'd expect at a place like that. And I think your critique of parenting as becoming so isolated for us, for parents, is spot on. And I'm glad that you explored it without making the whole book about that. It's just something that you pinpoint. So, but I get it. I mean, even in this interview, I'm like, oh, shoot, I really wanted to talk about that or that, and we didn't have time for it. So I feel you. All right. I want more regrets, though. You said you had
I have
at
one
least
more regret. In a book, you want your character to be interesting and you want them to be complex and also, I think, a little bad. But on the internet, you want a character, especially if that character is a woman, especially if she's a mom, to be perfect. Like, you don't want that person to have flaws. And, I think I spent a lot of time, I don't know how much of this actually showed up in the book, but I spent a lot of time worrying about, like, what people would think of me, not as a writer or as a character, but as a person. Like, am I a bad person? And that was something that, and it's like, of course, like I'm a bad person and I'm a good person and everybody is, whatever. I would never call another person a bad person unless they were really quite world historically bad. Yeah. So the fact that I said it so much about myself was not helpful, I think, in just like clearing my head to write the book. But I definitely think that people have a different experience encountering a character in a book, even if it's a memoir, than they do encountering like a real random person on the internet where you just read about one stupid thing that they did or thought, So it's hard to balance those things at a time when like many parts of my book could end up on the internet,
Yeah, I mean, my impression of you was of a person who was willing to talk about your flaws, and that's refreshing, right? It also didn't seem like confessional for the sake of being confessional. I liked thinking along with you. I think the fact that you would even reflect on how you felt as a person, or if you were living according to your ethics, or what your ethics even were, or were they kind of squared away, I felt a lot in common with that. And that to me is the mark of a person that I'd want to spend time with. Whether saying that person's good or bad, I could set that aside and just say, I like how this person thinks and challenges my thinking, and that I just enjoyed spending time with you in the book.
Okay, well, I'm gonna cut that part of the podcast, and I'm gonna play it back to myself as I write my next book.
Oh, good. Do you
so
have
I can
one in mind
imagine.
already?
I wish I could only write books. There are several books I want to write, but also Mark is writing a book now, and that's a lot for me to deal with because he was so helpful as I was writing my book, and now it's time for me to be helpful to him. So I have to sort of manage that also before I start writing another one of my own.
Well, you're a terrific writer. I seriously can't recommend the book enough. Second Life, Having a Child in the Digital Age. Like I said, I'm about 10 years away from like the stage that you're describing. But there were so many similarities and differences. It was just fascinating. And I think even people who don't have kids or don't want to have kids, this is the kind of book I'd love to see people dig into. It's great just sort of looking over the fence or hitting the broom into the ceiling of the apartment above us, the lives that we aren't living. And so your book definitely did that for me. So Amanda, thanks a ton for talking to me about it and for writing the book. I'm excited to know that you're going to be doing more books.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. That did not sound convincing.
I love that, and I'm not cutting it.
It's actually, right. It's not like the most fun thing for me to talk about my work, actually, but it was like I love talking to you.
Oh, good.
Maybe we could talk about something else next time. The next time we talk.
Yeah. Does it feel self-indulgent to you or something? Or like...
No, it's just, because it's done and I can't change it, it's hard to think about what it is. And I want to just pretend that it doesn't exist anymore. But also I think as I was writing it, I didn't really know what it was about. And now I'm like, well, I got to pretend like I do so that I can make podcast listeners at least want to perhaps try reading it.
Yeah.
So I have to figure that out,
Okay, well, take a page from my friend Lauren Sandler, who's been on the show before. She has no hesitation of disagreeing with her own self at times. So, like, if I put a question to her from her book, she's like, oh, yeah, I kind of actually don't really see it like that now. So I would just take that. Like, you get to say whatever you think now. Don't feel locked in by what you wrote.
I actually, like, right after I finished the book, I was like, oh, well, this book is the, complete encapsulation of everything I think, and it can be just, like, read and judged now. And now that I'm, like, several months away from that, I'm like, oh, this book isn't about me. It's about this person that I was a few months ago. And, it will just continue to be that.
Perfect. It's Second Life, Having a Child in the Digital Age. Amanda Hess, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Relationscapes. I'm journalist Blair Hodges. Thanks for listening. If something in this discussion resonated with you, I hope you'll pass the show along. Word of mouth is one of the biggest ways that podcasts grow. You can also rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify. And by the way, March was the first month since I launched the show that I didn't get a new review in Apple Podcasts. So we broke our streak. I got a few new ratings, but nobody wrote a review. So please head over there, go into Apple Podcasts, look up the show, scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap on that, and then it'll say write a review. You can do that. It's easy, it's quick, and I'll read it here on the show. I want to mispronounce your name, so go leave a review in Apple Podcasts. Mates of State provides our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you next time.